It has been a busy 10 days of missiles, missile defense, offensive missile defense, and a strike against a North Korean train that still has no signs of being real. But there is a whole lot of other things happening in the world that we should not forget about. Thus, you know the drill. It is time for some rapid-fire Q&A. I will have the usual ordering for today. First Ukraine, then Iran, then conflict more generally, then academic international relations, and then nonsense. Make sure to check the chapter markers so you can skip around to the questions most intriguing to you. First up, why does Ukraine not destroy critical infrastructure in Moscow, like water mains and electrical grids? Thank you for the $5. Well, to be clear, Ukraine does engage in that type of action to some degree. The issue is the scale of the operations versus the benefit of a successful attack. I am sure that hitting a power substation and leaving a neighborhood in the dark will upset the individuals living there. But to what end? That is not at the scale necessary for public resistance to the Kremlin to gain traction, and that type of damage done tends to be quick to repair. In contrast, both refinery strikes and the more recent Wildberries warehouse fires are far more effective because they scale well. Basically, we are looking at the familiar distance problem once again. If you have to go through that many layers of air defense, the targets had better be good. Water mains and electrical grids in Moscow do not cut it right now, at least not as part of some primary campaign. Next question. In an old video, you mentioned offhand going back in time and preventing the Ukraine war. As a semi-famous Yinzer, how would you overcome the credibility problem? Also, what would you try to do to prevent the war? It seemed like everyone knew it was coming and weren't willing to do more than send shoulder-fired rockets. This is an interesting thought experiment because it underscores the trouble with resolving bargaining frictions. I do not think sending me back in time would do anything about the start of the war. If we think that the best explanation for the bargaining breakdown was Russian overconfidence in the outcome, having a Westerner screaming, "Hey Russia, you are a lot weaker than you think you are," would not get us anywhere. I could not escape the incentive to misrepresent. And even if I prove to Russia that I am a time traveler from the future, I still have no sway here. The Kremlin could not differentiate me telling the truth from me as a time traveler who witnessed Ukraine getting crushed and is now trying to manipulate the timeline to stop it. This is basically the same problem that third-party mediators with good information face. They struggle to stop wars just as a time traveler would. On a more practical level, if you give me about 24 hours preparation, I would study very specific tactical details of the start of the war. I would also log a couple of days of sports results and lottery numbers. Either this would help me prove to Western intelligence that I am a time traveler, or I would have so much money that I could buy my way into the door, at which point my successive predictions being correct would make me look like a strategic genius, and then people would have to start listening to me for that reason. Next question. Why does anyone even pay attention to what Russia says? It has become very clear that they are lying all the time about pretty much everything. The media are bored, and the average consumer is too geopolitically illiterate to disregard the declarations. And this is not just a problem with Russia. The United States, Iran, Ukraine, China, your pick from Europe, they all say things that should result in us not updating our beliefs at all, and yet the social media machine eats it all up. I actually think the problem with paying attention to what Iran says is worse than the Russia situation, but that is a digression for another time. Next question. About depletion of the Patriot missiles, which I was surprised to learn are a collaborative effort between 400 companies and take 2 years to make. What would need to happen to make more faster? Has there ever been a sort of mobilization of industry in the US in recent times? What would have to happen for that to become unnecessary? Well, this is a place where that time machine would be helpful, because there is no simple solution to the problem. The best answer is that Europe places a ridiculously large order in 2014 and makes it contingent on both the United States expanding latent capacity and Europe licensing production on the continent. Throwing money at the problem today will help, but there is no getting around how the logistics of production act as a bottleneck. Breaking that would require invoking the Defense Production Act, and doing that at the scale that I think this question envisions would require something extreme, as in the PRC invading Taiwan extreme. The DPA gets invoked fairly consistently, but it is usually at a low level and not upsetting to the companies involved. I think the last time it was a major headline was during the pandemic. So, to bottom line the situation, the best time to throw money at the problem was a dozen years ago. The 13th best option is to throw money at the problem now, which is still better than the alternative. Next question. How tolerant will the IRGC be of the material deprivation of average Iranians as the cost of the strait remaining closed? My assumption is Afghan/Yemeni levels, but is this too extreme? Clearly, based on what we have seen so far, the answer is a lot. It is an open question of just how much, though, because that debate is a big part of why the war continues, or at least the economic war. I cannot say that I know the answer, because that broaches the territory of keyboard warrior thinks he is smarter than the people with trillion-dollar intelligence organizations. What I can say more confidently is that public perception is out of whack here. We do not see news stories about the economic problems inside of Iran, in part because reporters are not exactly floating around down there, and in part because the war is unpopular, and news stories to that effect will not draw clicks. I still do not know how the war will end, but the uncertainty here is fascinating. Next question. With the Strait of Hormuz not being the leverage in the future it is here, is it safe to say that Iran will now pursue a nuclear weapon in earnest? If so, how long should we expect it to take before they are a nuclear state? Everyone's mitigation efforts will indeed take some of the sting out of the next time that Iran tries a Hormuz shutdown. That does increase the utility, relatively speaking, of having a nuclear deterrent. Practically speaking, though, I am not convinced that Iran will be in any physical position to try building nuclear weapons for a decade, so I am not sure how much of a real effect there will be. Next question. Could the events on the Abraham Lincoln potentially encourage Iran to force the United States into an unfavorable agreement in the future, knowing that the worsening conditions on the ship could cause political backlash that might force Trump to quickly back down from the conflict from a weakened position? I am not sure that Iran should be taking anything away from the Lincoln situation directly, beyond it not being a good idea to keep sailors on an aircraft carrier for 9 months on end. If the Lincoln had to fight the war by itself, it would be a different story. But the Washington will be taking over within a couple of weeks, and that resets everything in terms of the crew stress levels. The bigger indirect take is that it raises serious questions about the Pentagon's operational planning for a longer conflict, though it is a bit more nebulous how that will affect Iran, especially since the fix here is to tell someone in Virginia, hey, maybe don't have the Washington be in the Gulf region for more than 6 months. Next question. If high gas prices are a problem for Trump, and the United States is self-sufficient in hydrocarbons, then isn't the obvious solution to ban the export of hydrocarbons? There are a few problems here. One is that oil markets are interconnected. Just because the United States is a net exporter does not make it self-sufficient, because there is a misalignment between the oil that the United States pulls out of the ground and how U.S. refineries are set up to process crude. 2, you cannot fix that problem with subsidies for what needs to be imported. That does not change the ultimate price of gasoline. It just makes the price jump look cheaper while passing the cost on to U.S. taxpayers. At that point, you would be better off just directly subsidizing gasoline prices. But that is a horrible idea more generally. Fuel consumption has negative externalities, so you should want to do the opposite. Congress would blow a gasket if there was ever an attempt to do so. Finally, export restrictions would be a drag on the U.S. economy overall, precisely because oil companies cannot sell their products at a premium abroad. If you find this outcome objectionable, then the much better solution is to tax the windfall profits for the oil companies and redistribute that money to US taxpayers. That beats once more effectively subsidizing fuel consumption. Next question. Recently, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey signed a mutual defense treaty. Is this at all similar to NATO, or is it more like CSTO? I would put it in between the two. There was a ton of media coverage describing it as a NATO equivalent because it has a collective defense clause. But friendly reminder that NATO's Article 5 is not what makes collective defense work. It is military integration that makes it credible. You cannot just suddenly say you are going to protect other countries and have that work just because you said it. I still rank this effort above the CSTO, though, because at least there is a more obvious mutual threat. Next question. You once said that the decreasing number of wars after World War II was due to the climbing costs of war. How would you then explain the rise in the number of conflicts over the last few years? Is the cost of war being counterbalanced by the effect of a rising power and a declining superpower? I think that this is a good reminder to be careful with over-interpreting data points, and this goes both ways. It was not hard to find people only 15 years ago who thought that the world was slowly marching to the complete end of major warfare. Heck, it wasn't that hard to find people who felt that way 5 years ago. And actually, it was a questionable decision for me to choose to study what I did, given that I could not control the hiring priorities of those around me. I may have been proven right, but that does not change whether it was a stupid decision back then. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I would not look at what is currently happening in the world and think that the long-run trend has changed. Economic growth and international commerce continues to undermine the utility of war. Arguably, it is the main thing preventing World War III from breaking out against China. That is not to say that things are great right now. I grew up in an innocent post-Cold War era. The current ruling generation has really dropped the ball on that one, which leaves my generation the responsibility to deliver to our children everything that we were promised once upon a time. Next question. Assassination plots against Trump are back in the news, with the plane switch in Turkiye. The president currently has a disapproval rating of about 62%. You mentioned the idea of a rally round the flag regarding assassinations. Would a foreign assassin really trigger a rally when the death of said president would be met with celebration by a majority of the populace? Well, let me make an important distinction here. A 62% disapproval rating does not mean that 62% of the American public would approve of an assassination. That said, I suppose the interesting thing about this situation is that the unpopular president would be dead. Trump himself struggles to benefit from rally round the flag effects because basically no one trusts him. Meanwhile, Vance has at times been the least popular politician in the United States, but that is a product of how liberals dislike him because he is in the Trump administration, and he lacks Trump's charisma to appeal to the MAGA wing. But I would fully expect him to get a rally bump under this circumstance. It can simultaneously be true that many Americans would not be especially sad that Trump is no longer president, and for those same Americans to be very concerned about the circumstances that led to that. Next question. Why does Turkiye get so much leeway? They seem to be almost asking for a coalition to form against them with all of the frictions that they cause. Thank you for the $15. I suppose that this is just a general lesson of geopolitics. Ankara spends a lot on its military and is in a strategically important crossroads of the world. Put those two things together, and you have a multiplicative effect in your leverage, and Ankara is very good at exercising it. Next question. I recently watched a video suggesting the US crackdown on drug dealers is all about opening up secure access to key resources that China has made scarce in the trade wars. I would welcome your insights on the apparent return to 19th century Monroe Doctrine and the imposition of US will on its Latin American neighbors. And thank you for the $15. I would say that this motivation has some backers in Washington. Personally, I would be much more concerned about Iran or a non-state actor working with one of those groups in exchange for a lot of money, with help setting up a cross-border drone operation. Something like that is bound to happen during my lifetime. The question is how long you can delay it. Next question. Why do you rarely talk about long-term reputation? For example, even if a negotiated settlement is better than war, the weaker country who gives up some stuff in the settlement is showing other countries that they are weak and can be bullied. If the weak country fights instead, they lose more now, but send a credible signal to a potential future enemy that they are stubborn and fight even in unfavorable situations. A couple of points. One, you can only signal reputation if there is meaningful uncertainty from a third-party actor about your general disposition. That is not always the case in international relations, and I would speculate that very rarely is it the case for 90% of mundane affairs that we never hear much about. And two, I think that the reputation question might have one of the biggest gaps between public perception and what the models tell us. Almost inevitably, the public's attention is on the first-order incentive for a party to signal resolve and toughness. There is no discussion of how opponents should internalize that incentive and adjust their offers accordingly. All of this just gets baked into the optimal proposal, and it is even possible that the desire to signal leads to less conflict initially, precisely because the opponent knows to buy out that desire with a more generous offer. Next question. After the recent comments about the ICC from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is there a way to solve the enforcement problem with current international law? And with the United States pulling back, is there another entity that can help with the enforcement problem? Thank you for the $10. I think it speaks volumes that much of international law only worked because the United States was there to enforce it, which makes it much less international law and much more Washington's personal geopolitical policy preference. I also think we would all be better off recognizing that most international organizations are toothless, but they can still be helpful if you structure them correctly. Focusing on trying to create external enforcement is a waste of time, when effort could be spent instead coming up with creative solutions to structure cooperation in the absence of that. Next question. In my understanding, climate policy has the structure of a prisoner's dilemma. Fossil fuels deliver large, immediate benefits to the country burning them, while the resulting damage is global and long-term. All countries are likely better off if global warming is limited, but limiting it requires all, or nearly all countries, to phase out fossil fuels, and it is better individually for each country to free-ride regardless of what anyone else is doing. Is this right? Thank you for the €10. In a word, yes. But what makes this different from a standard repeated prisoner's dilemma is that you have 200 countries playing it, which makes punishing defectors by halting your own public goods provision a poor alternative. The better alternative is to privatize the punishment in the form of targeted economic sanctions. That said, I invite you to look at the public reaction to the Lindsey Graham bill on secondary sanctions for importers of Russian oil. It is the same structure of the problem, and people freaked out at the notion of using sanctions to enforce public goods provision, even though it is the textbook solution to the problem. So, I guess wake me up in 100 years when the public better understands these incentives, and then you could get credible enforcement of climate deals. Next question. I have a question for your academic alter ego. Do your YouTube videos count toward your tenure or post-tenure review? Though not published in a peer-reviewed journal, I would hope your YouTube videos count as some kind of dissemination. Also, to be perfectly clear, this is not a bribe. This is a special monetary obligation. Well, thank you for the $20 of special monetary obligations. Nope, it basically counts for nothing, at least not directly. There are some indirect benefits in the form of having more visibility in the discipline, but I am tenured, so none of that matters much anyway. Next question. Is there anything to learn about lines on maps and crisis bargaining in relation to the recent FIFA debacle? I get the impression that had Infantino, I think that's how you say his name, I don't really know, I'm American, these things don't matter much to me. I get the impression that had Infantino watched your videos, he would have realized that a conversation was preferable to a unilateral action. I am not sure that this is specifically a crisis bargaining point, but I get the feeling that soccer officials are particularly bad at internalizing the consequences of their actions and proactively strategizing given those constraints. Instead, they do something dumb and then have to spend the next month undoing everything. And if you are going to be so bad about this, at least bring back the 3-touch penalty kicks, you cowards! Serenity now with the next question. Why does war need 1,000 deaths to be called war? Why not 999 or 451? Does this mean that a war with the Vatican, in which the Vatican is totally annihilated, would technically not be a war? This is a little bit inside baseball, but the question is referring to how the most common conflict dataset in international relations sets the threshold for war at 1,000 battle deaths. And the answer is literally because a bunch of dudes in Michigan decided so in the 1980s. In their defense, you need to set a threshold somewhere, and 1,000 does not seem obviously worse than any of the alternatives. I am also not familiar with any major findings in international relations that would change if you alter the threshold. And not to worry if you are the Vatican. You too can be involved in a war, and I am not just making an obscure reference to the Papal States era. The threshold is 1,000 total battle deaths across combatants, not 1,000 per side. Next question. Are you planning to write any more books? I do not think that I have written my final book, but the economics of it do not make any sense. Side note, every now and then I will see a comment about how my YouTube channels are actually just a scam to get you to buy my books. I always get a kick of just how clueless those people are. Anyway, I think that I will massively expand how Ukraine survived once the war ends, but that will just be for my own personal satisfaction. Maybe my self-respecting academic alter ego will write something about NATO navigating the Trump years too. Next question. How does one get into crisis bargaining theory? What are the career options for it, and how much does it pay? All I am doing is applying a particular method to the study of international relations, so your career options would be the same as anyone else who works on international conflict. So basically, enjoy being overworked and underpaid in Washington, or wherever your capital is. The problem with getting into crisis bargaining specifically is that it is PhD level work inside of a political science department. There are only 10 or so institutions equipped to produce researchers on the topic, and they are all difficult schools to get into. Sorry for the unhelpful answer. I would say that having a monthly audience in the millions would help increase demand for it, and thus market supply would respond accordingly. But per the earlier question, academia is not exactly known for rapidly responding to what is happening in the outside world. Next question. If Russia and Ukraine could each deploy one Pokémon, which one would each pick and why? Russia should be Ursaluna because Russian bear jokes are still fashionable. I would pick Magikarp for Ukraine. The battle starts out looking like a joke, but then suddenly Magikarp evolves into Gyarados and things get much more interesting. Next question. I wonder if crisis bargaining theory can be applied to professional wrestling. For example, when someone is lifted high into the air and is about to get body slammed, is the shaking over their head and wagging of the finger a form of bargaining? Or is crisis bargaining theory better applied to the pre-match press conference? To answer a silly question with some level of seriousness, and to keep things strictly within kayfabe, the big difference between international conflict and professional fighting leagues is that the former is inefficient and the latter is profitable. War is costly, so you should want to negotiate a settlement. In contrast, if you negotiate a settlement before a professional fight, then you do not sell tickets and no one makes money. You could, however, think of a submission as a convergence in beliefs about what the expected outcome of the fight will be, which has a direct war analog. Next question. What is the expected bargaining cost to persuade you to go skydiving? I doubt that I will ever go skydiving. Aside from the danger, it is just something that I have never found interesting. I would be much more inclined to go to space when I am older and closer to death anyway. And there is a reasonable chance that it becomes acceptably expensive within my lifetime. Next question. Can love bloom on a battlefield? You know, that is a very good question, and I would love to answer it, but right now I'm a bit distracted by this cardboard box sitting next to me. Next question. Do you say, "Poutine is done," after eating poutine? I love Canada. I have taken more trips there than I can count. My next trip is tentatively scheduled for Nova Scotia, so I can pay tribute to the shrine of Sidney Crosby. But I cannot say that I am a fan of poutine. Though the Yinzer in me is now wondering if poutine would be good on a sandwich. Next question. How much can the garbage plate influence your take on the tactical international chaos that the Kremlin seems to lean slightly into? That dish is wild, but it is beloved and enjoyed by many, post-drunk, though is kinda, maybe, probably a poor choice for long-term health. Now here is a dish of carbs and fat that I can get behind. Given that I survived on garbage plates as a grad student, I suppose they have been instrumental to my understanding of international relations. Think of it this way. After eating French fries, macaroni salad, a hot dog, a hamburger patty with cheese, and a meat-based sauce of questionable origin, what else are you going to do but ruminate on militarized conflict? Next question. If you played League of Legends, what was your highest rank? What other games do you like to play? I have not played that game in well over a decade, and almost all of my time in it was right as it came out, before the rank system came into effect. Most of my competitive gaming these days is in Magic the Gathering. I am reasonably good at it, despite having never truly committed to the highest tier of competition. But if this means anything to anyone, I finished in the money at what was the equivalent of the Junior National Championship in 2003, and I have close to 300,000 gems banked on Arena, all of which were earned in-game. Next and final question. Does my dad love me? I am failing to see the line on the map or where he went. He just went out to get a gallon of milk. Don't worry, he'll be back soon. Just like how I will be back soon. Check the Geopolitics Helpline archive to tide you over until then. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.